What is up, gamers? This is my Shojodoji deck that I have been playing for the past couple of weeks online, and it's felt a lot better than I actually expected. If you saw my tier list video, I put Shojodoji at the bottom in tier 3. It is still probably roughly around there, or like mid-low tier 2.5, but I do believe this is actually better than it looks, and there is some pretty crazy things the deck can do. So we will start with the ride line, and it is all the Shojodojis, the normal ride line for it. I do believe this is one of the better ride lines in the format. It's just the rest of the pieces around the deck isn't as great, which is why like people don't think about how good this ride line is. So we have a normal starter, which doesn't change anything. Then the grade 1 Shojodoji, whenever you ride it, you check top 5, pick 2 stealth normal units, and put one of them into your soul and one into the bind zone. And then while it's in bind zone, during your main phase, you can soul blast one and call him out to rear guard. So this sets up your bind zone for your grade 3 Shojodoji later on, while also fueling your soul and basically helping you find your pieces that you need to win the game. And then the grade 2 Shojodoji, whenever you ride it, you check top 5 and grab 2 stealth normal units again. But this time you put one in the soul and the other into your rear guard. And that has the same second effect of being able to call it out from bind zone for a soul blast, which both of those second effects do come up. But yeah, so this ride line, basically, your grade 1 is fueling your bind and giving you a soul. And then your grade 2 gives you a rear guard and a soul. Throughout your entire ride line process, whenever you'll be discarding 2 to ride, and then you'll be getting +2 soul, a card and bind, and a free rear guard off of that. And this basically allows you to play really aggressively because you can call stealth units that normally are like not great, but you can like cheat them out early, or they have ton of effects that like gain power. So this ride line just gives you so much aggression where you can just push the opponent super hard on your turn 2. And then your main grade 3, so act Vanguard once per turn, you combine 2 stealth units from your soul, and then you choose 2 of your opponent's rear guard circles, not units, but circles, and then you bind all the cards on those circles, and then at the end of the turn, you put the cards you bound on your opponent's field back into the hand. And then the second effect is auto Vanguard. Whenever it attacks a Vanguard, you counterblast 1, put 2 rear guards in the soul. You can call a stealth unit from your bind zone, and then if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, then that unit you call gets plus 10k. Shojodoji is really interesting. So just on his first skill, he has a very unique way to disrupt the board because you target circles, not units, and then bind them. So you can bind like really powerful interceptors like Obscudate, and then they'll go back into the hand at the end of the turn, but that's fine because you mainly just want to bind the interceptors, so then your attacks are a little bit harder to guard. And you can bind just really annoying units in the back row, and there are a couple of cards in here that let you bot deck things and just allows you to have a very unique way to disrupt the board. His second skill, whenever it attacks a Vanguard, you counterblast 1, put 2 rears of soul, refuels his soul to be able to bind on your next turn while also giving you a 4th attack. And if you went second, then on your turn 3, you'll have a really big rear guard attack because Shojodoji gives it plus 10. And then his first skill also just lets you set up your bind zone really easily. And if you happen to bind your ride line, and you're just needing to call a board, then your ride line can call themselves back out doing your main phase, so then you have a board to mess with. So because of how this ride line works, my specific variant is as a hyper aggro deck, where you kind of just don't think about what the opponent is doing that much, and you just kind of slam them non-stop. Because there's a lot of low-grade units in the deck that just gives you advantage or helps you set up your field. And because of your ride line, you're able to cheat out more units into play a lot faster. So yeah, that's it for the ride line. Next we have 3 Persona Rides. This deck really wants Persona Ride. It also wants units in play to be able to attack with. I am not currently running the Grail. It is a very viable option. I just found there were like situations whenever I was playing the deck that having Grail in your deck makes your stealth units a little less consistent on being able to find your pieces. But having the extra Persona Ride does help on making it better. The interesting thing with Shojodoji also is because it is a stealth unit. If you're trying to play a little bit faster or you need rear guards, then this is a stealth unit that can work with all your other stealth units' effects. So like Shojodoji can bind himself from soul and then also call himself if you don't have like any other good targets left. So having the extras do come up outside of just Persona Ride. Next is our other grade 3, which is Unprecedented. When placed on rearguard by a card ability, if your Vanguard is a Tamayura or Shojodoji, you can Soul Blast 1 and draw a card. And Continuous Rearguard, if 2 or more cards are put into your soul from a rearguard, then he has plus 10k. This is your main like rearguard in the deck. One, it's a really big beater. If you have Shojodoji on your Vanguard, and you have Unprecedented in your bind zone, and let's say your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3, whenever you attack with Shojodoji and call out Unprecedented, it'll get plus 10k from Shojodoji. But because Unprecedented is just, if you have done the effect of putting rearguards in the soul this turn, then no matter when he was placed during that turn, he will have the plus 10. So then he'll swing for 33 afterwards, which is a really powerful number. He also just helps keep your hand a little bit more fueled. A lot of the times you're kind of just dumping your hand turn 1 or 2, depending on if you went first or second. So having Unprecedented as a way to refuel your hand a little bit really makes the difference, because you're not really trying to tank a lot of attacks or guard a lot. You just want to guard whenever it's like super easy, and then just take all the big ones, and then just use all your pieces and keep calling them down and hitting the opponent. So having the extra draw does help in that case. And yeah, so a lot of the times what will happen is you will have an Unprecedented on rearguard and then 1 in bind, and then you do Shojodoji, send this column into soul, and then call this, and then you have 2 really big columns. And another cool thing with it is if your hand is like really bad and you find it off your grade 2 Shojodoji, you can call it out while you're grade 2, and then you can do his Soul Blast draw skill. There is no way to get his plus 10k off that early in the game yet. It does come up of you just needing to dig through your deck to find more pieces. Next, we will start with grade 2s. So first is Jakumetsu Arcs. So when placed on rearguard from bind zone, he has plus 5k for the turn. So he's a 15k beater. And then whenever it attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 and choose one of your opponent's bound cards and bot deck it. This is one of the ways you can bot deck your opponent's bound cards. So if they have like really annoying rearguards that you want to get rid of, then you can attack with Jakumetsu Arcs and then bot deck it, which is really obnoxious for some decks to deal with. A lot of the times in this meta though, the bot deck effect isn't that important. Jet doesn't really care. Overlord doesn't really care. Youthbook only cares about Wayward and potentially like the front row rearguards, but they have ways to shuffle their deck, so it's a little bit harder for them to get it back. Ava's weird because you bot deck the Obscudades, so then they're able to call them back out off Ava and get the bonus effects. But if they bounce back to hand, then they still have like the 10k shields they are. So it's really situation dependent against Ava if you do bot deck the Obscudades. And then it being a 15k beater from bind zone is pretty alright. So if you call it off Shojodoji, it'll be a 25k attack. And then if you have an 8k booster behind it, it's 33. So it's a really good number. It's just a lot of the times you don't want to call this off bind zone. You want to call Unprecedented or some other units, potentially. I only have it at 3 because it's not super necessary in every matchup to have the ability to bot deck things. And I'd rather use that soul on other abilities in my deck. Next up is 2 more of the grade 2 Shojodoji. So we play it because of its bind zone effect of being able to call itself out. What this can do is if you found it off your grade 1 ride line, then you can bind it. And then on your turn 2, you can Soul Blast 1 and call it out. So that gives you another free attacker during your grade 2. Your grade 2 turn is like the most important turn in this deck, because if you don't get enough pressure off in that time frame, then it's really hard to win the game from there, because every other deck scales like crazy, and Shojodoji only like strength compared to those decks is his grade 2 game. So I try to lean into it more, and having this Shojodoji in there is really strong in that case. And then he just really helps in the later stages as well, because you'll sometimes have like loose soul that you don't need because you get 2 soul off of your ride line and then you keep putting rearguards back into soul from Shojodoji. Having this be a consistent way to keep getting a rearguard to send back into soul is really strong. So having multiples of these is really handy in being able to keep your engine running. Next up is 3 Oshikuni and 2 Harenreisu. So Hadenresu is really solid. Whenever it's placed on rearguard by your Vanguard's ability, it gets plus 10k until end of turn. But it's based 9k, so it'll be 19k by itself. And if you call it off your grade 3, then he'll be 29, which is a really solid number. And then Oshikuni, whenever it attacks, if your opponent has 2 or less rearguards, then he gets 5k for the battle. So he's a 15k beater that doesn't cost anything and has a very easy restriction to fulfill. You can play around with these ratios. They both have like different use cases. So if you're calling off Shojodoji, then they're pretty similar in strength. If you have a booster still, then Oshikuni's better. If you don't have a booster, then Hadenresu. Because Hadenresu will hit 29. And even if you have an 8k booster, it doesn't hit a magic number. So having a booster doesn't really change that much. And then Oshikuni with a booster will swing 33 from Shojodoji calling it, which is really solid. But the other big thing about it is if you call it off of your grade 2, if you call Hadenresu off your grade 2, then this will be base 19. And if you're going first, then that calls for a 15k shield. If you're going second, it calls for 10k, but most of the time, they're not going to have 10k shields at that point in the game. So this is still going to basically ask for 15k shield. And then Oshikuni fulfills sort of that same role, where if you call it early and you have a booster, then it'll swing for 23. You're going first, then your opponent's an 8k Vanguard, so that'll be a 23k swing to their 8, which makes them have to guard with 20k shield, which is usually 2 cards at that point. So it's really interesting. You can mess around with these ratios, see if you, whichever version you like. I normally would run like this, but I only have 2 of these for now for some reason. I thought I had a third. So either way, mix and match with these. These are your grade 2 beaters that you want to have early on and call off your effects to be able to really put pressure on the opponent. Next up is grade 1s. So 2 more of the grade 1 ride line. Same reasoning as the grade 2. It has different cases for it because it's a grade 1 8k booster. So you can call it behind your Vanguard and it will consistently swing for 21. That's like the big awkward thing about Shojodoji, is the Vanguard never gains power. You want ways to be able to give him power and just have the attack be decent enough. And then, yeah, all the same use cases as the like grade 2 in like helping set up your field and being aggressive early. Cool thing you can do is if you're going second and you ride one of him and you check top 5 and see another, you can bind him and then instantly call him back out, and then you have an extra attacker on your turn 1. So if you're playing a matchup like Chronojet, where you want to be super aggressive as soon as you can, then this is a really cool play you can do. Next is 3 Komayan. So when placed on rearguard from hand, that's super important. You can Counterblast 1, choose an opponent's card from their bind zone, and you may put it on the bottom of the deck. If you don't bot deck anything, then you can call a stealth unit from your bind zone that's the same or lower grade as your Vanguard. A lot of the times you don't actually use this for the bot deck effect, you use it for the call effect. Though one bad thing about the card is it has to be called from hand to even use it. So you can't call it off Shojodoji, use its effect to call another thing and have 5 attacks. That isn't doable in here. But what it can do, you rode your grade 1 and you bound an Oshikuni early, let's say. Then on your next turn, you can call this and then Counterblast 1 and then call the Oshikuni. And then you'll have a 23k swing, which is really solid. You cannot do that with Hadenresu because it has to be called from your Vanguard's ability to be able to gain its power. So you can still call it, it just won't gain any power off of it. So it's really solid in that regard. And it also helps just rebuild your field because there's a lot of removal in the format. So having this be able to find your pieces from your soul that go to bind and then call them back out from bind is really handy. And if you're looking for like a specific thing in your main phase, you can also call Unprecedented off of it. And then you'll have a 23k beater and you'll Soul Blast and draw off of it. So there's a lot of use cases for it in the deck. If you have too many though, it will start like bricking your hand because it doesn't do anything other than extend your, not extend, it helps set up your play. And you just need enough pieces where having this in your hand is good. And you usually only need to use 1 in the game. So yeah, very solid card. And then the expensive part of the deck for Forktail, you can probably play the deck without Forktail. Just Forktail helps so much. So there's a lot of cool things it can do. Whenever you call it, you check top 7 and put a glitter or a stealth unit from there into your soul and then shuffle. So this does not have to be placed from hand. So you can call it off Shojodoji and it will be an 18k attacker with the on-play skill of checking top 7. So if your soul is like really bad, then you can try to help dig through your soul with this. A lot of the time it's not necessary, but that is a play. But what it also just does is grade 1 and 2, you have a 8k rearguard you can play without worrying about it not being useful yet. Because Koban, you have to have a little bit set up already to make this strong. And then the grade 1 Shojodoji is also solid and can be good to call early on. Forktail is your best call early on because it helps set up your soul and find more things that you can bind and call. And it's also an 8k beater / booster. So if you're going second, then you can drop this down turn 1 as a rearguard and swing with it. Because you just want to keep making the opponent have to use cards in their hand. Because everything strong in this format right now draws a ton of cards. So you have to basically hit the ground running and just try to bash the opponent in as much as possible. And Forktail helps that because she's not a strong rearguard her own. So whenever you lose her, she'll go away. And then it's not like you lost an important piece to your combo. And in the process, it is helping you fuel your deck. So Forktail is honestly just pretty necessary if you want to try to compete with it. If you're looking to just have fun with it, then you can cut Forktail and put in more of these guys or any of the beaters. Basically just more copies of the cards already in the deck. And then last for grade 1s, there is 2 twin bucklers, 2 of the stealth perfect guard. So the big question you're probably asking is why no Sanctitude? Sanctitude is solid and good. Honestly, it's not as important in here. Actually just makes your deck a little bit more clunky because you're already going to naturally have a really small hand size. So having these perfect guards are really important to be able to survive your opponent's turn easier. So if you just want to run 4 of these, then that's perfectly fine. The weird part is these. So the major thing is that it's a stealth unit. So it gives you more targets to be able to call and put in the bind zone from your Shojodoji, which you basically only want to do that if you aren't finding all your pieces in time. But it just gives you a little bit extra more consistency on being able to build a rush. And yeah, that's basically the main thing. You aren't liking these, then putting in 4 twin buckler is completely fine. I'm still going back and forth between it, but this is an idea. And then triggers. So 1 over trigger, really broken, but in here, it actually just is really oppressive to the opponent because Shojodoji, his on attack skill, it is not once per turn. So it functions like Tamayura, where you can just attack and then call a new field. So a lot of the times when OT is hit, you'll have like, let's just build a field real quick. Boom, 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 something like that. So there is some grossness here. You attack with this column, then you'll attack with this for 21. You'll do Shojodoji skill, move these into soul, and then you'll call something out. We'll just say Jakumetsu arcs to start, and then you'll check OT. So then OT will restand your Vanguard, and then you give 100 million or something. I usually just give it to Vanguard, but it's situation dependent, of course. And then this already has the plus 10k from Shojodoji effect. So this can be 2331. And then you'll attack with Shojodoji again. And then do its skill, put these in the soul. And then call something else out. And then that's how you get your 6 attacks in this deck, is only with OT. And if it's on your Persona Ride turn, it's really strong. I would not run the Cray Elemental OT. I think Drag Veda is very necessary in this particular... It just really extends how far you can push with. Next up is 8 crit. So we're an aggro deck. We're a mindless aggro deck. We gotta hit the opponent really hard and slam the face in and just put damage on the board. There's not much purpose of damage denying with this deck because there's no like big win con you will just have that other decks have. So you basically just have to abuse these crits and try to put damage on the board. A lot of the times, if you're rushing super early, if you hit a crit on your Vanguard drive check, then it can be very punishing for the opponent. The opponent will feel super uncomfortable and hate their life with you hitting 1 crit during a grade 1 or 2 turn. 8 crit, super important. I would not go any less. One other thing, you can run the soul and crit if you're finding you're struggling with soul. I found I'm like almost never struggling with soul as long as you bind your pieces correctly. And there's definitely like a skill cap to it. And so the soul and crit basically lets you use your grade 2 and 1 Shojodoji more often and use your soul blast effects a lot. But you already get 2 soul from your ride line. Every turn you'll be getting 2 soul from Shojodoji. So you should have enough soul where it's not needed. So instead, the 5k power that these give, if you're really trying to be aggressive and you drop these down early, if you're grade 2 and the opponent's grade 2, then calling this as a 15k attack and hits a magic number. If you're playing with grade 3s at that point, then putting this behind your grade 3 hits 28 or 18, which is a magic number in itself. So I think these crits are just better than the Solen crits in this particular build. And then for heal, these could be counter heals if you want, depending on your local meta. In the like grand scheme of things in this current meta, the counter heals are really bad right now because if we look at the best decks, there's Chronojet, counter heals don't do anything into them. There's Ava, the crit heal works against them. There's Youthberg, it doesn't do anything there. There's Overlord, it doesn't do anything there. So against all the decks you're like probably gonna be facing the most, only Ava has a counter heal that is worked against. So just having normal heals at the moment is just better if you're going to like a big regional. And then last of the triggers are 3 fronts. So these could be draws if you want it to be. I found that draws don't raise the ceiling of this deck that much. It raises the floor a bit, but the floor is already like really high compared to most decks because it's really consistent at what it does, because you're constantly searching through your deck and digging for pieces and putting them in the soul where the opponent can't touch them. And then you're able to bind them and then call them back out. I think fronts just help so much because you're naturally going to have a smaller hand size. So the 10k shields versus 20k shields, it's pretty obvious what's better there is 20k shields. So having this be 1-card guards against a lot of things is really important, because you just don't have a hand a lot of the time. Like, if you have more than 6 cards in your hand, then you probably hit OT. So having these be 1-card guards against things are really important. And then just, if you hit a front early game, where you called like a full front row to try to beat the opponent down, then that could be really devastating. And then on your grade 3 turns, you'll attack with a rear guard, then your Vanguard, and then you'll suck in that first rear guard that attacked, and then call a new one in its spot. So then your front trigger is still going to hit 3 units no matter what. So I just think fronts are really important in this deck specifically. Looking in the mulligan, there are a couple of things you can look for. I'm still figuring it out myself because there's so many different ways you can go about it. You can look for Persona Ride because your Persona Ride turns are really strong, and it is really important on having your Persona Ride on turn 4 to try to close out a game. If the game is going beyond turn 4, then you're probably losing. So having a guaranteed Persona Ride in your opening hand is pretty important. If you are going second, or going first or second is fine with Forktail, because Forktail, you can put it behind your grade 2 and have an 18k attack if you're going first. Or if you're going second, you call it in your front row and attack with it. So either way, having a Forktail to help fuel your soul is pretty strong. You could have Unprecedented in your hand or try to look for it. I find it's actually not that important because it doesn't do anything early on. So I usually just send it back because it is a grade 3 that you cannot call early on because it's in your hand. So Unprecedented is pretty weak in your opening hand. There is Oshikuni also because it swings for 15, and that's just a good number if you're going first or second. And then Oshikuni following up is also still good because Shojodoji can bind the opponent's field. And then it makes its condition super easy to hit to be able to consistently be a 15k beater. And then the last card that I think is pretty good is Koman. If you high roll off of your grade 2 Shojodoji, then this being able to call that thing you bound back on the field is really strong. And then you basically just like generate a board a little bit easier. But also your basically vanilla units are also still good to keep. Like having one of these in your hand is really solid to have behind your Vanguard. So there's a lot of different routes you can go with your mulligan. It's really dependent on if you're going first or second and if you know what your matchup is. If you don't know, then just keep messing around with it and you'll find like how aggressive you want to be throughout your time. I'll show a sample of an early game real quick because it can be pretty difficult to navigate through. So if it's even, I'm going first. If it's odds, I'm going to go second. It is evens, so we are going first. So our opening hand looks pretty rough. I usually just try to send back all PGs and triggers. You can try to keep one trigger early if you're afraid of like getting rushed as well, but sending these back is always pretty good. And then Oryx early game doesn't really do much. It can be a beta if you want, but you mainly want to like find it to bind later on and then call it back out. So I'll send back 4. And we'll find Hadenresu, another Oshikuni, an Unprecedented, an Unprecedented. Okay, so that's a pretty weird hand. I probably didn't shuffle well enough, but we'll play off it. Okay, so we're first, so draw. So there's different routes you can take to discard. I personally like discarding Hadenresu because you have to commit so much at this point to be able to get this usable, because you have to send it into soul first from Shojodoji and then bind it off his skill and then do it. So we won't be able to use his full potential till turn 4. So it's better to just off it and try to find something better. So grade 1 Shojodoji skill, we will look at top 5. What a terrible search. Yeah, so if we just pick this, it has to go into soul. And I think at this point we have to, just to fuel our soul a little bit, to fuel all of our costs later on. Which makes this card a lot worse going into our next turn, because we did not hit the second stealth unit. So we will pass turn because we went first. We will take 1, powered, and then our turn, so draw. Draw Personalized, so that's pretty solid. At this point, it is really hard to use Unprecedented. These are like your 2 targets basically right now. Discarding Unprecedented will be, yeah, Unprecedented will be fine. We want this to have as a booster, because our numbers are like not great naturally. So having a booster is really solid. So we will ride grade 2 Shojodoji and then hope we get a little bit more lucky here. So we hit Forktail Unprecedented. So 1 will go in the soul and 1 will get bound. So how do you decide what to do? We went first, so the opponent's at an 8k right now. So we can call Forktail here and still have it hit, and then Unprecedented can go to soul. And I think I like that play better right now, because then next turn we can bind Unprecedented off of our grade 3 and then call it off of it. So we can get our draw later on anyway. And we basically sacrifice a slightly stronger turn now for a lot stronger turn next turn. So we will do that. And then Forktail can now be a front row rear guard that can attack and ask for a 5k shield to block. So we will do Forktail skill. Check top 7. 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 3 good targets. These are all really solid targets. So right now, I like Jakumetsu Oryx, because if we call it off Shojodoji, it'll get +5. And that'll hit the same number as Hadenresu. And so you can swing for 15, have an interceptor to use on your next turn, and then also have the ability to bot deck something. So now we have 2 good targets for our grade 3 Shojodoji next turn. And then, so what we can do is move Forktail back and call Oshikuni. And then we have a 23k attack here. And we can drop down another Oshikuni. So we just have a really strong turn 2. Even with our whiff on our grade 1, we just still naturally have a strong board because our grade 2 Shojodoji can call something. So you basically want to play smallest to highest up until your opponent hits a damage trigger. Then you might have to mix around with it. So we'll go 15. And then we'll swing 10 from Vanguard. And then do our check. It's a grade 1 Shojodoji. And then swing for 23. So it may not seem that strong, but this asks for 10k shield. This asks for 5k for 1 to pass, 15 if they want to no pass it. And then this asks for 20. So this is still like really strong. And we do this attack last because if they hit a damage trigger, then this will still hit and keep pressure on the opponent. So smallest to highest. And then it is the opponent's turn. So let's say they like call 2 units. They attack here and deal us 1 damage. Okay. And then on our next turn, we will stand and draw. So there's multiple ways we can go about this. The discard target here is pretty hard. We just have to like think ahead on like how our board is going to look or what we want to build. So we definitely want to call this unprecedented because it hits 23 this turn no matter what. And then having these two as options are solid. This is a necessity for next turn. So we can't discard these two. Having a crit at this point to just help live through one more turn is really solid. So we basically have to discard one of these. Think I'm going to discard this because we can call something off of Koman. So we will ride Shojodoji and then we will call unprecedented. And then we will do Shojodoji skill. So there's two ways to go about this. We have basically 4 good bind targets in our soul. So it's really like game dependent on what you call here. I personally like unprecedented and our grade 1 Shojodoji because then we have an unprecedented we can call later or call this turn. And then we can use this Shojodoji to call itself out. So our soul is more useful than our counterblast. Because the only things counterblasting in this deck are Shojodoji and Koman. We will call Koman and then do its skill to counterblast and call Shojodoji back out. And then we will go into battle phase. So there's multiple ways you can go about your attack order. Basically, is it here or here first? The route you can think about is like the numbers like super different. So personally, I like going for the highest number, but if you attack with this column first and send it back to soul, then you have an unprecedented ready for your next turn. So it really just depends on game state and how fast you want to play. So we're going to go like the most aggro variant because that's how I like to play the deck. So we bound 2 units off of Shojodoji. So no matter what, Oshikuni at this point is going to be base 15. So this will be 23. And then we will attack with Shojodoji for 21. Do his skill. Counterblast, put Forktail and Shojodoji into soul, and then we will call the unprecedented from bind. So now, unprecedented will proc, we will soul blast the card, usually the starter first because it doesn't do anything, and then we will draw. And then both of these gain plus 10k from their own effects. So this will swing for 23, this will swing for 31, which is like really good numbers on the opponent's grade 2. So first check, heal. I doubt we heal at this point because we've hit them so hard already. So we can give power to either, kind of works. I like power here just to make these like about the same number. And then second check, another heal. That was 3 heals in a row. I guess it didn't shuffle well enough. So we'll give power here. So this is now 43 and this is 31. So swing for 31 and then 43. And then on your next turn, you will Persona Ride and try to close out the game from that. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I've been really enjoying this deck. It's probably my current favorite deck in the format. Even though it's like not outstanding, it's super consistent and it feels really good to slam the opponent so early on because a lot of the past decks in the game have been really slow and you like don't play from turn 1 or 2 and you basically have to wait till turn 3 of Persona Ride to be able to start doing things. So having this deck be able to play the game from turn 1 is really fun. And it's a very different take on Vanguard right now and I really enjoy it. So yeah, thank you all for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!